Alright, so I got a 2014 Ford Fusion, a 1.6 EcoBoost, not the engine you want to work on. So I'll be replacing the water pump. In order to get that off, you have to take a lot of the engine components off, and let me show you what those are. And I should add that before you start working on any vehicle, to disconnect the battery. So one of the first things you're going to remove is the coolant reservoir. There's an 8mm bolt under this wire, and then there's 3 return lines you have to take off. So next you need to remove the alternator. There's 2 15s there, right here, and then there's 1 here. And then you need to remove this clip here, just a tab on it, and then there's a 13mm that you can take off this wire with. It might be a little tight getting it out of there, but you can get it out of there. Alright, so next you're going to remove some vacuum lines. This one's fairly easy to get off, just use 2 hands. And then pull this back on that. And then this hose has to come off. It has hose clamps. It comes right here and over here. And then the next vacuum line would be right here. Just pull this tab, push it from the back, and then just pull up. So next you're gonna take apart the wiring harness. So you just push this tab in, push this down. It'll come off. This one, there's a tab on top here. You just push down and pull off. And then we have a bunch of wire clips. They go there. There's a bolt here, star bit, and then this one just pulls straight up. You're gonna unplug this one. There's a cam sensor back here and up here. So next you're gonna remove the air box. We just kind of set it in there, but so it sits under here, and then so obviously these bolts would be on top. They're a 6 or a 7, and this will come out. So on the bottom of this, there's a couple tabs you got to kind of just pry up on. They're on the battery box. So you're going to remove the battery completely. This is the battery clamp. It's an 8mm, I believe. And then we have 3 more to take off. And then this will come out, and then you just put your 3 8mm back so you don't lose them. Alright, so next you're going to remove this coolant hose. There's 2 clamps. There's one on this end, and then there's one on this end. And it's kind of routed under these wires here, and then above this one. So it'll go in like this. And there's a spot for the radiator, it's just down in here. This right here is where the other end goes for that. So before you pull your airbox off, you're going to remove this air hose here. There's a small little hose here that goes on the bottom of this. Just pull the clamp up out of the way so you don't lose it. Then there's another line that goes to this. And then these are just 2 clamps you just got to take off. That should come off today. This line here goes to this, like that, and just push in the tabs. And then the next one it goes to your throttle body. These are also just a couple clamps here, and then a couple wires that go to this. This is also part of the clamps. Now ask me, why am I taking apart half of this car? Well, you see that? Because I don't. So, the starter is in here. I can't even see it. But So in order to get the shifter linkage off for the rear starter bolt, you want to pop this off here, and it would go in here, and it would go up to this nipple here. Just pry up very gently with a screwdriver or something to pry up with. It'll be fairly easily to come off. And then on this, there's a bolt hole here, so an 8mm you need to take off. Then there's tabs on each side of this plastic piece. You want to push that way, and then this one goes the other way. And you want to pull up while you're doing that, all at the same time, and it should come out fairly easily. Now Ford, I don't have an engineering degree, but I could design a car better than this when I was 6 with coloring crayons. So once you get the splash guard off from underneath the car, you want to drain your oil and your coolant. Just put the drain plug back in. So to get to the starter bolt, after we took off that hose, there's 2 more. You just want to pry down on the bottom one, and then you should be able to see the rear starter bolt hole back in there. You want to use a swivel and an extension with a 13mm socket. So in order to get to the front 2 starter bolts, you want to remove this splash guard. I believe they're T25. There's 5 in the front, 1 on each side, and then there's 2 in the back. So we jacked up the car to get underneath it so we can work under there without a lift or something like that. So on the first side, we did 1 notch on the jack stand on the pinch welds, and then on the other side we did the same thing. Realized that wasn't high enough, so then we went back and raised it up again. I believe it's on 3 now. That's appropriate for the job that we're doing. Next, we're going to have to remove that oil cooler you see right in front of you. And then that's where your oil filter goes, but you're going to want a 12mm, pretty long, like 2 or 3 inches. And it goes in right on the side of the oil pan. In order to get the starter out, you are better off to remove that. So here underneath the car, the starter is here. And then we have a couple bolts down here that we can get to. There would be one right here. Other side of that there, and then the one that you can see the bolt coming out of up there. We can just leave that one all the way out, but you don't have to take it out completely. You can just leave that in there. So this side is what attaches the oil cooler. This side would be the oil filter. So pull the oil filter off, and you notice that there's no hex head on this. So on the inside of that, 12mm would go in, and that's what turns that out. And then once you get that all the way out, the oil cooler would just come right off. Normally your oil cooler would be here, and you just follow that over to here, and we drained the coolant from this hose right here. We just pulled this off, and then this hose would come off there. So right here is where your tensioner is. That's a 17mm bolt, I believe. You pull up towards the top engine or counterclockwise. You can pull the serpentine belt off, but you don't want to pull it all the way off yet. Again, Ford Engineering with their coloring crowns, you can't pull this tensioner off without removing the motor mount. It's so close to the timing chain cover. So now that we got the starter out, we're going to lift the engine. You want to put a wood block between the jack and the oil pan so you spread the load. And then we're going to pull the motor mount off. So then you're going to want to put a block of wood between your jack and the oil pan, and you want that to be centered so you can spread the load correctly. And then put some pressure on it, just enough to where the jack is kind of supporting the engine, but just enough to where you can loosen the motor mounts and the engine not to go anywhere. So this is the starter here, right above where the oil cooler was. we're going to want to leave these two bolts in, this one and the one up top, to put your flywheel locking tool on. So you're going to want to take the motor mount here, just slowly loosen these to make sure that the engine is supported correctly. If you go too fast and the engine may take a chance of falling or something like that. It's 18 millimeter on these three here. And if the engine starts to drop, you're going to want to put some more pressure on it with the jack to make sure that's supported correctly. So now we're going to take the serpentine tensioner off. We have two 13 millimeter bolts right here to take off, and that should just come right out. So here's the water pump. As you can tell, we got a lot of slop in there. That's not supposed to do that. So that's what we got to replace. Alright, so now we're taking off the timing cover. There's a whole bunch of 8 millimeter bolts around it. We gotta take off in order to get the timing cover off. And that'll come off there. One there, there. So now we're gonna remove the inner wheel well, and then the lower control arm. We ended up breaking our steering knuckle, so we're gonna go ahead and replace the control arm and the knuckle. So now we're gonna spin the crank with an 18 millimeter socket, clockwise only, and then we're going to put until our cams are about 11 o'clock position. And then we're going to put our so once you've done all that, you're going to put your crank locking pin in. That is behind your half shaft, so you have to take that off in order to get to that, so it will hold the counterweight. And then you're going to want to slowly go clockwise until it thuds against the counterweight. Then you're going to place your cam locking tool this way with the arrow going up, just in here. So now we're going to put our flywheel locking tool on. We're just going to use our starter bolts But we'll have to find some nuts to go on the end, that way it stays together. Here's the tool to lock the flywheel so that the cam and crank is all locked together. The crank can't go either way. We had to procure bolts to go on the original starter bolts we used. We procured nuts for that. Those are 10mm by 1.5 coarse thread. I just got them at a Rural King, but any auto parts store or hardware store, you ought to be able to get those nuts. You want to make sure that blade's fully engaged into the tooth of your flywheel. And there's different blades that come on that, different lengths. I'll show you here in a second. And so you got to get one long enough to reach out and get to the flywheel and engage the tooth. And here, I'll show you. Oh. In the kit, those blades. There's a bunch of them here, different. How it goes in there. There's another one, different length. Okay. So then we've got the locking pin into the 10mm bolt that was behind the bracket that mounted the half shaft. So we just matched up the diameter here. It's the only one that fit the pin that we removed for the diameter, and then the threads we just slowly went to make sure that we weren't cross-threading it, but it's the only one that would fit. Obviously they give you several. This kit's for several different Mazda and Ford vehicles. Okay, once we locked the flywheel, we made sure with 18mm on the crank pulley that it wouldn't go forwards or backwards, clockwise or counterclockwise. Normally you always want to go clockwise or you're going to bend your lifters. Once we secured it with the pin and the flywheel locking tool, then we put the cam locking tool on here. It won't go anywhere. We used an impact with the 18mm socket to pull this crank pulley off here. This is the front side. As you can see on the back side, there's one little notch right there, rectangular notch. We're going to use, when we get there we'll show you, but this tool right here will go where the crank position sensor was, and we'll bolt it on there, and then we catch it right here into that notch so that our timing is exactly correct as far as the crank position sensor is reading this pulley. And of course, I don't know if you can see it. Yeah, I destroyed my steering knuckle. That thing wouldn't want to come out there for anything, so guess who's buying a new lower control arm and a steering knuckle? Yeah, a lot of fun. Good job, Ford. I'm impressed. This is some awesome engineering. You should not have to remove half of a freaking engine just to get a water pump out. But as you can see, they put the crank belt tensioner mounted to the flange of the water pump. So there's no way to do this job without locking it top dead center and pulling all this off here. It's just an insane amount of work to replace a water pump. I mean insane. I would imagine this at a shop would easily be $2,000 plus. I could see it being higher. I mean, a guy that's done this 10 or 20 times, maybe he could do it in a few days. I don't know, but whew, do not attempt this job unless you have some mechanical aptitude
a little bit of time on your hands and some extra money to throw at parts, because in the end, I'm going to end up replacing the starter. If you take a look at it, I'll have to check out a new one. You hold that light on there. But see how that moves around a little bit? I'm not sure that's normal. And then that bearing just seems wobbly in there. And there's a decent amount of metal shavings, so the whole thing is you're not going to want to pull half this, but you don't have to pull as much apart to get to the starter, but you're still going to have to pull the oil cooler off the bottom. You're going to have to pull the air box out. You're going to have to pull the battery tray out, you know, half your tubing, all your air tubing. I mean, you don't want to do that again for a $70 starter, so guess who's buying a new starter too? You know, the parts were not horrible for this job. The kit comes with a timing belt, comes with a tensioner, comes with a new bolt. That's a stress bolt for the crank pulley. Trying to remember here. It's probably over here. Let's look, make sure. It's like a $109 kit. Okay. So you got basically your water pump, your timing belt, your pulley, new bolt, gasket, sure, you know, the whole deal. We got, yeah. So we got a new tensioner here, we got a new belt, we got the timing pump, we got the bolt, $109. So a $109 job is going to turn into $2,000 in labor, and you might as well replace your starter. So there's another $70. So you got $180, 109 plus 70 for your starter. What else did we have to buy? Oh, I went ahead and bought a new serpentine belt. I mean, duh, you can't. This tensioner mounts up to this bracket here that you have to pull off. You can't put it back on once you got the cam locking tool in. But the bolts, when they back out, hit the motor mount right here. There's no way. You got to pull the motor mount just to get the tensioner off. Which, okay, but you know, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna go ahead and replace that serpentine belt, have all new belts. I'm not gonna go through that again. You don't have to go through near as much because you're just gonna jack the engine and pull the motor mounts. But for your serpentine tensioner, but who wants to do all that once you're already this far in? Spend the money. Oh my God, just spend it and get it over with. Because you don't want to have to do any of this again.